Hello, welcome
Hello.
to Football Geeks podcast. Our guest tonight is author of a high concept book exploring the late goals. It's called 90 plus 2, last minute moments that change football history. And it's about goals that have been scored in that time that's become to known as Fergie Time. And he's here to chat about some of the iconic games, goals, and moments on tonight's show. It gives me great pleasure to welcome John Boland. John, good evening, sir.
Good evening, Phil. Good evening, Phil. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening.
Yeah, before we went online, we talked about the possibility of an anthology for this particular book, because what with the ever-expanding amount of time that takes place at the end of football games, we could go somewhere into kind of 90 plus 12, 90 plus 14, and yeah, it's a great concept, but it's got plenty of mileage too, hasn't it, mate?
Definitely. So that's the interesting shift in recent times with the significant amount of additional time that's added on. The era that I'm focused on sort of spans from the late 80s through to the present day, but obviously, as you say, the more injury time that's added, the more the potential for drama, and we're seeing that this season already. And I'm getting quite excited with the book out and us sort of getting to the business end of the current season. There's bound to be a few more moments to add over the next few months, particularly with the Premiership and Scottish title races, and even the Championship for that matter. They're all tight title races. So let's keep an eye out for some more brilliant last minute goals in the next few months as well.
That's right, man. And as you say, it's an ongoing story, isn't it? So it's never going to wear out. There's always going to be those additional games that are going to come to the before. So John, if you can give us a brief introduction about the book, what inspired it, and what can the readers expect from 90 plus 2?
So, like a few people that I've become aware of in the sort of writing world, it was a pandemic project to begin with. So those idle evenings with not much to do, the seed literally became from some of my own experiences. So a few of the games that are mentioned in the book, I was at, and the seed was a last minute goal or later that had a decisive impact on a season. So I love the fact that the actual concept is so relatable, because every fan of football can experience a last minute moment with their team. But as we look at some of the more significant ones, the ones that turned a title race, the ones that clinched a title on the last day of the season, it just it ups the ante spectacularly. It was deep into the pandemic. I started putting a few things down around my own recollections, either big matches that I remember watching on TV, big matches that I'd been at, and I was like, there's a lot of twists in some of these late on. So that just then I did a degree in history at Cambridge, and that just then the research element just kicked in, and the more I dug into it, the more serendipitous became, because you could just connect some of these events and find some wonderfully obscure stories in there as well. So that's what I tried to do. The book, it's not a factoid book. It's deliberately written and designed as a story. So it weaves the emotion, it weaves in narratives about match day experiences, the build up to things, all the things that we as fans look forward to, and then obviously the set pieces are the last minute moments that people will recall some of the big ones, but hopefully they will enjoy the journey of some of the more curious ones that are in there. And the key things to look out for is it's late goals that decided title races, late goals that won cup finals, late goals in internationals that got teams to a World Cup, or in some cases actually put them through to the latter stages of the World Cup or European Championships itself. So the coverage is broad, but it just weaves that singular concept through it all. It's when the board goes up and says you've got 2, 4, or as we were talking before we came online, these days it's more like 8 or 10 minutes. And I even as a youngster, that sort of recollection of the roar of a crowd particularly if it was, you know, a home team trying to get a late goal. As soon as the board went up, the crowd gets a little bit more noisy, and then if there's a goal late on, just brilliant feeling. So that's the source of it all, and I had a great time writing it, and hopefully people will really enjoy some of the matches that I've recalled throughout the story.
I'm sure they will, mate. And that's what I particularly liked about it. It's a rolling narrative. It doesn't stick to chronology in the way that some books do, where it's just a chapter about one event. It gives you an overview of a kind of period of time, and also goes into ramifications of what may have happened as well. So it's quite it's quite what if in its construction as well, which is always enjoyable, because the what ifs are what make football such an enigma and such an absorbing sport, isn't it?
Absolutely.
But out of the entire book, I asked you to just pick 5 iconic games that hinged on that 90+2 moment. And the first one that we're going to talk about is probably in the top 2 of the most dramatic moments in English domestic football. The other we'll cover later, John. We know what we're alluding to, but the audience listening may not. But they'll get the picture as we go on. So, John, Aguero, talk us through the season that culminated in the moment and the moment itself. It's quite a story.
It's astonishing. So this is the conclusion to the 2012 Premiership season, and I mean, you couldn't ask for a more dream setup. Last day of the season, we got to a point where the 2 Manchester clubs are vying for the title, and it's just an astonishing scenario that unfolded. So we've got ultimately Man City at that point holding the ace card at the start of the day, just needing to win because of their superior goal difference, and we'll get to what happened, but the reason for that superior goal difference, I think, is brilliant in itself, because of course earlier in the season they'd gone to Old Trafford and demolished United 6-1, but 3 of the goals had come after the 90-minute mark. And I remember, even, you know, at the time of that season playing out, Sir Alex Ferguson was furious at the way that game in particular transpired, because they were down a man. They knew the game was gone, but they just became so loose, and those 3 additional goals obviously contributed to City's goal difference advantage. So there's an ironic twist in, as we all come to recall, Fergie time actually sort of costing United in that part of the season. But then, you know, all of that preceding the most dramatic finish to a Premier League season that most people would instantly recall. So City just needed to win. Imagine, with 90 minutes on the clock of your last home match of the season, not just being held by lowly QPR, but actually being 2-1 down against 10 men. And I'm sure City fans in the stadium we've seen some of the images, you know, people were in tears, and the sense of despair that must have been taking hold around the stadium at that time was incredible. And of course, the reason I'd pick this out as one of my top ones is in the uniqueness of what was transpiring that day. They didn't just need an equalizer; they needed a winner as well. So that equalizer from Dzeko, you sort of celebrate it because it's necessary for where you want to get to, but you're still watching the clock and running out of time. And then when Aguero got that winner, there's just, I'm not a City or United fan, but I can immediately recollect so many scenes from that day where you've got Joe Hart, the Man City goalkeeper, just wheeling around like a child in absolute delight, disbelief, all emotions just come into the foreground. It's incredible. Martin Tyler and the iconic commentary is just, you know, writ large in there as well. But as a football observer, to go from that prospect of deep despair, because it wouldn't have just been losing the title, it would have been losing it to your most bitter rivals. And could you imagine the banter that would have come City's way forever if it had gone wrong. But they pulled it out from nowhere, and yeah, just an absolutely incredible finish that, you know, obviously fans of both Manchester clubs, you know, just taken through the ringer that day. But I think football fans in general just left breathless at how that match in particular unfolded. And of course, City win the title on goal difference as a consequence of, you know, the last minute goals on the day, but also some big last minute moments earlier in the season that put them, you know, just ahead of United. Incredible.
Yeah, it was an astonishing game, and as you say, we've all felt as fans that sour filtrate of defeat, but usually defeat is something that you can drink off in the pub afterwards, like you go to the pub, have a few beers, have a laugh about it. But that feasibly, if Man City hadn't have won and they hadn't have ended that 44 wait for a title, that could have injured you for life as a fan. You know what I mean? And that's the great thing about the book, isn't it? The difference between the joy of victory and that dark depth sorrow of defeat. And I think that is one of the great stories that kind of attest to that. But it was also lovely, as you say, for Man City for Man United to succumb to what became the dreaded Fergie time too.
Yes,
but absolutely. Yeah, fabulous. But moving on, you delve into Scottish football, and particularly the old firm derbies, dated back from 1979 onwards. Could you give us an overview of some of the finishes in the Scottish Premiership and Cup before explaining the circumstances surrounding the crucial Celtic Rangers fixture of 2008?
Sure. So I have a vested interest here. Your point about trauma and experiences. So for many of the years in the sort of early 2000s and onwards, I was a Celtic season ticket holder. So I was up close and personal to some of these traumas. So that's what, you know, a lot of people have bantered me about, because I couldn't not put into the book some of the most dramatic finishes to Scottish Premier League title chases, but two in particular in 2003 and then again in 2005 were horrible to write about as a Celtic fan. So 2003, one of the most epic seasons in recent Scottish history. Celtic and Rangers in that era still two very strong sides. The contemporary era is much more challenging now because they can't compete with the wages, etc., that kind of thing. But 2003, you had Celtic all the way to the UEFA Cup final. You had the two teams going into the last match of the season, locked together on points, locked together on goal difference, and Rangers holding the edge on goals scored. And that particular set of final fixtures, Rangers were at home against Dunfermline. They won 6-1 in the end with a crucial last-minute penalty from Mikel Arteta. So he was the one who buried the penalty to give him a 6-1 win at the same time as Celtic winning 4-0. But what I've written in the book is there was a switcheroo in late in that game where Celtic actually missed a penalty, and that's the finest of margins it came down to. If Arteta had missed his penalty and Celtic had scored theirs, the title was going in another direction. That was tough enough. 2 years later, Celtic went into the final day of the season, not tied on points with Rangers, actually holding a points advantage, and were leading 1-0 up until the 90th minute, and proceeded to not just concede an equaliser, but to concede another goal and ultimately slip to defeat whilst Rangers were winning against Hibs in Edinburgh. And that was the one that became known as Helicopter Sunday. So Rangers fans gleefully celebrate that because there was the image of the helicopter turning around to take the title over to Edinburgh to be presented to Rangers, when we were all getting set for Celtic to lift the trophy instead. But yeah, that was definitely one that got away. And even John Hartson, who was a big player for Celtic at that time, he's in a documentary saying that one was really painful and
really hurt. Yeah, that really
struggled to let that one go. So in the book, there is a lot on Scottish football. It is a passion of mine. I felt it necessary to try and balance it. So to 2008, when finally something important and crucial went Celtic's way. This was actually a game that I was at in April 2008. Celtic, that was the year Rangers actually went all the way to the UEFA Cup final, so they had a bit of a fixture pile up. But at one stage, Rangers were several points clear of Celtic with 2 games in hand, and in Scotland that's normally terminal. But there was just some signs of life as Celtic headed into April, and there was a lot of intrigue because there was 2 Glasgow derbies to come, and through circumstances, both of them were actually to be played at Celtic Park. So the first one was an evening match, brilliant, floodlit atmospheres. Everything just seems to go up a notch when it's a night game. But getting towards 90 minutes, it was Celtic 1, Rangers 1. Rangers were down to 10 men as a result of Carlos Cuellar being sent off for one of the most spectacular saves I've ever seen. But a deliberate handball on the goal line, he tipped a Nakamura shot onto the crossbar, which had given Celtic a penalty, which they then missed. Which is just, so at this point, you're at 90 minutes and you think, oh, this is done, because it would have been crucial to get the win to start chopping that gap down. And what I loved about that one, not just being at it, but it's almost like time slows down, because Celtic defender Gary Caldwell gets the ball midway into the Rangers half. His only option is to loft it forward. He does so to Scott McDonald. I remember it vividly. Smallest strike on the pitch, somehow manages to nod it across, and then his strike partner Vennegoor Hesselink is in the middle of the box, seemingly in an acre of space, and he just strains his neck muscles to nod it past the keeper, and that was on 90+4. And you just in an instant, title hopes were just back. It was back on. You came out of the ground that evening thinking this is back on, and as it transpired, Celtic then beat Rangers 3-2 a week later, won all their games through to the end of the season. And incredibly, to the psychology of it, this was a Rangers team that had won 24 and drawn 3 of their first 30 games of the season, who then proceeded to just stumble left, right and centre. I think there was a draw against Dundee. They then lost to Aberdeen, as well as losing the 2 games against Celtic. They just ran out of steam. And Celtic clinched the title with a win on the last day of the season. But that was a real turning point. And just as a plug for the book, that match is mentioned in a chapter where I pick out turning points slightly earlier or in a title run-in, and one of the prompts for that was my memory as a kid of Kevin Keegan's Entertainers in Newcastle, and what people have talked about as possibly the greatest Premier League game ever played, which was the Liverpool 4 Newcastle 3, and Collymore closing in, that kind of it just again. So there's a chapter in the book that explores those key games just towards the business end of the season, where a significant result sets a team on a particular path and either helps deliver a title for them, or unfortunately for Newcastle fans, it saw them come up short against Fergie on that occasion.
Yeah, I mean, it's for every Fir Park, there's a Celtic Park on the night in 2008, isn't there? So it's nice to see that there is a historical balance. One of the good friends of our show is actually the Shamrock fanzine editor, Paul McQuaid, and he's guested for us a couple of times, and he's going to absolutely love this part of the interview. So hello, Paul, if you're out there listening. So what we're going to do, we're going to head south of the border again, and we're going to drop a few rungs on the pyramid now, and explore the crazy goings on in the League One playoff semi of last season between Sheffield Wednesday and Peterborough. What a game that was. Do you want to give us some context there, buddy?
So yeah, absolutely, Phil. This one is also close to my heart, in the sense that from the age of 6 I actually grew up in Peterborough, so I developed a soft spot for the club, and was actually at the first leg, where Peterborough, mesmerizing evening where Peterborough, who'd snuck into the playoffs on the last day of the season, were up against Sheffield Wednesday, who incredibly, I think they finished on something like 96 points, and
Yeah.
because it was so competitive at the top, that was only enough for third place. So they were also obviously in the playoffs. But yeah, Sheffield Wednesday came into town, and just a mesmerizing evening at London Road, where Peterborough out of nowhere just tore them apart. 4-0 lead, and I remember walking out of the stadium, just seeing people in disbelief with huge smiles on their faces. But I also remember one wise old cynic who was expressing frustration that Peterborough hadn't buried a 5th goal in injury time, and the keeper had made a stunning save. So a 4-0 lead, wasn't enough, and most people just laughed it off. But little did we know what was going to grip the nation a few days later, because the game just became enthralling. And in the book, it was a late addition to the book, because I had a manuscript almost ready, and remember talking to Pitch Publishing and saying, look, there's no way that we can't acknowledge what happened in the second leg at Hillsborough in the playoff semi-final. And I've written in the book, but you could imagine Peterborough's approach to it, the manager saying, lads, let's just keep it tight early on in the second leg. Okay, that's the first fail. An early goal conceded. Then you're saying, all right, well, let's get to half time, just a goal, a goal behind. We've still got a healthy advantage. And then the second goal goes in before half time, and you're like, no, this isn't the script. And it just kept getting worse for Peterborough, or better, obviously, for Sheffield Wednesday, because with 15 to 20 minutes left, 3-0 up, raucous atmosphere, you could just think this is heading south for Peterborough. Really, really, it's going horribly wrong. But again, these moments are writ large, and obviously it's easy for me to say because I've written the book and I've immersed myself in it. But it got to 90 plus 6, 90 plus 7. And you just think, Peterborough, they're there. Just get rid of it. And there was a ball into the box, and it was just a horrible moment where a clearance was sclaffed along the ground, and that was time up. If that ball had been launched anywhere, that was it, and you don't have this story. But it was immediately returned into the box, nodded across, the ball's in the net, and you're just like this disbelief. And it was just astonishing. So obviously it's the biggest comeback in playoff history, but that was only part of it. So the 90 plus 8 goal delivered us extra time. And incredibly, Sheffield Wednesday then scored an own goal, which put Peterborough back in front. But I just think by that point, that was just delaying the inevitable, because you could you could sense the energy in the ground. You could ultimately tell where it was going. They got another one, so 5-1. Away goals don't count. We're going to penalties, and that's one penalty shootout that you would have put the house on Sheffield Wednesday winning, because you just knew it felt fated. And they won that. And then I remember being at a friend's house on the day of the playoff final, and we were just chit-chatting and put on the sort of period of extra time that Sheffield Wednesday were then in against Barnsley, and to just round off their season beautifully, they scored on 120 plus 3 to clinch promotion, which is just bonkers, absolutely bonkers. So yeah, incredible experience for Peterborough that whole summer. So many fans going through that. It probably would have been better that we weren't promoted, because the squad's not quite ready. Let's have some fun in League One. Console yourself. And you know what? They've bounced back. They bounced back well. They're in the playoffs at the minute, in the playoff spots at the moment. We've got the EFL Trophy final coming up next month, so they're having another strong season. But yeah, an epic fail when you look at the pure facts, to go with a 4-0 advantage from the first leg and to bomb out in the way they did is harsh. But it was just that was just an incredible evening as well.
Yeah, it's a horrible feeling when, as a fan, you can see that game just it's absolute just slipping away from you, and we've all had those moments. I mean, it's awful. It's awful. But we'll move on. We'll move on from there. Fortunately, it hasn't had the ramifications for Peterborough that some of these results have had for other sides. But I don't think we can go into any exploration of your 90+2 concept, and I don't think it would be complete without including the game that included the machinations of the originator of Fergie Time, obviously Sir Alex, and quite a big game at the tail end of the 1998-99 season. We talked before, funnily enough, before we go into it, about what ifs. I had a couple of guests on a couple of weeks ago talking about what ifs, and one of the what ifs was if the Champions League only included champions. Well, this final was played between two sides, neither of whom were champions of their league, but they went in both chasing trebles, didn't they?
Yes, yeah, just an astonishing conclusion to that season, and it sometimes, you know, at the time in that 98-99 season, the big ticket moments were evidently there. Sometimes when you look back, you're just reminded at how those achievements, because, you know, we hear people talk about, you know, teams achieving trebles in different leagues, even the current talk about Manchester City's treble. I think I'm a purist in the sense that any team that can hoover up 3 trophies, particularly 2 cup competitions, it's a magnificent achievement, whatever league or wherever you're playing, because the potential for jeopardy is just there throughout the entire season. So of course, for 98-99 Manchester United's treble, well, there were so many moments where it might not have been, to your point about the what ifs, because we had most people, if you were challenging them about United's FA Cup run in that season, would probably pick out the Ryan Giggs winner against Arsenal in the semi-final. But we have to remember that Dennis Bergkamp missed a 90th minute penalty in that match, that would have been it there. But in the book, I went back further, because there was the earlier round against Liverpool at Old Trafford, where Liverpool were 1-0 up with a minute or two left, and United, in a neat little preview of what they would do on a mega scale in Barcelona, they didn't just grab the equalizer late on, they snaffled the winner as well, and turned it around for a 2-1 win. So that brings us to the Champions League, and, you know, the one that Sir Alex was obviously always after, and, you know, huge stakes going into that final. Bayern Munich were an astonishing team as well. So it was, you know, absolutely take your point about the, you know, neither were champions. They were 2 monster teams, and they really gave, you know, a final for the ages. But when you think sometimes if things are meant to be, they're meant to be, because if you rewatch that final, there's Mehmet Scholl's chip, which sailed over Schmeichel and bounced back off the bar. There's Carsten Janker's incredible overhead hook that cannons off the crossbar, and just how United weren't 2-0 down going into the final stages is barely comprehensible. But then, you know, the super subs, Sheringham and Solskjaer, and again, it's just the stakes are huge. It's the Champions League final. To grab an equaliser on 90+1, well, that's good enough in the context, because you're thinking it's done. You're thinking this was the big chance. You know, the rarity of getting to these massive European final, relative rarity. You know, players, I've read so much about players thinking this is my one chance, and it's all or nothing. But grabbing the equaliser, you know, that just floored Bayern, but you're still thinking, well, we'll here's another 30 minutes. You know, fans, of if you're not a United or Bayern supporter, you kind of think, well, here's a treat of an extra 30 minutes. But then, you know, another corner into the box, and you're just absolute bedlam, and, you know, just that pivot from possible despair of seeing a chance just gone, to then comprehending the equalizer, which is, you know, bought you time and kept the hopes alive, to then instantly won, because you knew at that point, and there's the famous images of United's just, again, delirious celebrations, and then Sami Kufur of Bayern just beating the ground in frustration. and just, you know, those emotions, as you said earlier, Phil, we experience them as fans, but we must remember players must experience that as well. You know, this is something that they've pushed the whole season for, they've pushed, you know, perhaps their entire careers for, and to see the dreams disappear or conversely be realized is just astonishing. So yeah, it was a phenomenal season for United, and what a way to finish it, you know.
Yeah, but I always say I don't believe in ghosts, but ghosts are the things that haunt you. And for every Bayern Munich fan and Bayern Munich player who was on the pitch that day, that must be their ghost. But I mean, fortunately, they came back the next year and they won it. So they recovered. Oh no, it was 2 years after when they recovered.
2 years later, they recovered.
So there was some deliverance, but that Man United team on the day was incredibly lopsided because, of course, they were missing Keane and Scholes, weren't they? Who were out, and they were the engine room of that side, and Bayern utterly dominated the game, and it all rested on those incredible moments at the very end. So
Absolutely.
yeah. In an interesting aside to your story, you talked about the semi-final between Arsenal and Man U when obviously we remember the Ryan Giggs wonder goal, but I can't remember what I heard. I think it was an Arsenal fan who was talking about that game and said on 90 minutes when it was 1-1, Nicolas Anelka scored an offside goal. But they were so lost in kind of in joy, the Arsenal fans. No one realised in the one end that it had been chalked off, and then immediately from the restart, they went up and got the penalty. So there were Arsenal fans on the terrace who were labouring under the misconception that they were already 2-1 up, and Bergkamp's penalty was going to make it 3-1, and then when he missed it, it was like, oh, well, it's all right. So, hang on. Look at the scoreboard; it's still 1-1. So,
do you know what? That's a brilliant reminder of sometimes the confusion that can just break out, and people not knowing what's going on is if you're there, and I love the sort of bit of a throwback because, you know, it's only 98, 99, but football was a little different in those days, wasn't it? You know, we've become very clinical now with VAR and you know, all of the constant reviews, but you know, some glorious chaos. That sounds brilliant.
The blind joy of a goal going in for your team, isn't it? So
absolutely.
But so Arsenal didn't have their moment that day, but they have had their moment. And the fifth match that you were talking about is another one of those dramatic moments in English domestic football. And we'll sign off with a late goal at the end of the 1988-89 season. That had a huge effect, not only on the outcome of the season, but shaped the next couple of decades for English football, I would say, John. And of course, I'm talking about Liverpool and Arsenal at Anfield. Tell us that particular story.
So this was the big prompt ultimately for the book, because this was, for me, I was aged 8 at the time, and I acknowledge it in the book that what was a very emotional season for English football with Hillsborough and the other events going on was perhaps slightly more lost on me as an 8-year-old. So I recall that title conclusion, because obviously the reason we ended up with Liverpool playing Arsenal at Anfield in the very last match of the season to decide the title was because of that match being postponed in the aftermath of Hillsborough. So out of that, we got this conclusion to the season that was just it was unprecedented, because all the other teams had played, I think, the week before. And this Friday night was the last match of the season, and we had Arsenal in second place playing Liverpool in first place, and the only way Arsenal could overhaul them was to win by 2 clear goals, and that was the setup for just an incredible, you know, it's been made into a documentary, but I think anyone very creative that could turn that into some kind of theatre production, because it was just pure theatre that evening. So Arsenal opened the scoring early enough in the second half to just dial up the sense of tension that surrounded the ground, because it was, you know, one more false move from Liverpool, Arsenal desperate for a crucial second, and just as the game came towards the 90 minutes, scoreline was still the same. For me, kid allowed to stay up late to watch it because it was on the Friday evening, all of those kind of things. The commentary is iconic, masterful. You know, we just the way that it just built up. Arsenal still looking for it, probing, Liverpool holding firm, that kind of thing. And of course, it gave us it's up for grabs now as Michael Thomas broke through. And even now, I rewatched that goal 100 times, and I still can't fathom the geometry of how it managed to ricochet off a Liverpool defender, but then just continue to flow perfectly through to meet Thomas, who's running into the penalty box for him to then lift it over Bruce Grobbelaar. It just an astonishing moment. And of course, in that moment, the title was going from the home team to the away team. I think that is the ultimate. You know, the two teams contesting the title on the last day of the season are playing each other on the same pitch. The away team with a huge task. And of course, as you were sort of alluding to, Phil, that prompted a real transformation in English football for all sorts of reasons. But, you know, sporting wise, Liverpool were just such a dominant force. And, you know, going into that, everything was stacked against Arsenal, and the task was, you know, the task was always big. But Liverpool were a fearsome outfit throughout that era of football, so that just intensified the scale of what was facing George Graham and Arsenal. But they did it, and they came away with it, and it just, you know, it was an astonishing era of English football. And of course, we were on the cusp of, you know, the Premier League. We still had, you know, some great title races in that period. Leeds United taking the old First Division title, and then United finally, you know, breaking their own sort of long, I think it's about 26 years between their titles. So yeah, fascinating era. But that match, laden with emotion, just unbelievable. And you talked earlier about summers and what people are facing. Such an emotional season for Liverpool, and such an incredible conclusion to, you know, to the game. And you know, you just look at Kenny Dalglish was just, you know, staring into space and just, you know, trying to comprehend what had happened. But yeah, an absolutely astonishing game, one that, as I say, I remember in my very formative stages, and probably subconsciously was the 90+2 seed that was always there, and as just then came to life once I started to research the book properly a couple of years ago.
Do you know what, Joe? Actually, I remember watching the game, and it was 90+2 on the clock in the top corner of the when Michael Thomas broken through, and it was significant because I think that defeat caused Liverpool to question themselves, and although they won the league the next year, they were never quite the potent force that they were prior to that. So there was that, and I think also a significant effect that it had was that game was watched by multi-millions of people in it, and it probably sort of spirited the seed for the Sky kind of you know, the kind of inception of Sky, because the potential of football had become recognized in that polarized kind of moment. So yeah, and your book captures all of this, right? It's a really, really fantastic narrative, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Great stuff.
So where is it available? Where can our listeners get their hands on this fantastic tome?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. So it's been out for almost a month now. So through Amazon, so online, so ebook or order a paperback. It's also in a number of Waterstones bookshops, and you can get it via WH Smith or direct from Pitch Publishing, so the publisher's website as well. But yeah, it's been out for just shy of a month. We've had a really good start, getting some really good feedback, and it's cutting through because of, you know, the relatable nature of the principal plot point. So I do run a blog as well, so a weekly blog every Monday, which just captures more of the 90 plus moments, so a bit of a diary for potentially a sequel. But just in the build up to the formal release of the book, I did a 4-part blog series, 90 plus 2, doing the 92. So I looked at all 92 English league teams, and here's an incredible stat. So there is only one team so far this season that has yet to experience the joy of a 90 plus goal, and it's Cheltenham Town. So I'm keeping my eyes out for Cheltenham Town to grab a 90 plus goal between now and the end of the season, because every other league team has done it at least once, which I think is pretty cool. But as we said offline, also looking forward to the end of the season, where some of these late moments are going to be ever more pivotal. But yeah, online via Amazon is probably the easiest route, but equally in Waterstones, WH Smith, or via Pitch Publishing. So yeah.
Amazing. But what I'll do, I'll get at the end of this, I'll get the blog address. I'll put it in the contents box at the bottom, so when people tune in, they can look at that too.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. I love concept books like this, and it really ticks boxes for fans of that kind of what if kind of mentality. John, you've been a terrific guest, and thank you for joining us. And we'll see you all next time on Fussball Geeks. Bye for now, guys.